Wait, that's the end music, isn't it? Hello, my name's Justin the Clue.
And I'm Will Sloan.
And you're listening to the Important Cinema Club. And that's all, folks. Nah, I'm just kidding. We're just starting. And we're going to be talking about the Looney Tunes. Or the Merry Melodies. Both, really. So, cartoons. Are they important in your life, Will? Were they important when you were a kid? Did you toss them away and go, these are for children?
Of course they're important in my life. Aren't they important in everyone's life?
Well,
Cartoons?
some people at a certain age decide, like, oh, these are infantile, make dumb jokes, like, they have no value to me anymore.
No, I remember when I was maybe 9 or 10, I rented a video from Blockbuster called Cartoons for Big Kids, which was not a porn. It was...
yeah, you beat me to it.
Yeah, it was actually a documentary hosted by a friend of the show, Leonard Maltin, in which he sort of showed in their entirety a lot of somewhat racy cartoons, Red Hot Riding Hood.
He's like, make sure your mom is out of the room for this one, kids. Yeah. Maltin After Dark.
Yeah, he was a very Al Goldstein-like presence.
Just sweaty under lights with a big gold chain.
I give this one 95 on the Peter meter. But no, he showed the Big Snooze, the Great Piggy Bank Robbery, and despite the somewhat lascivious-sounding title, it was very much about how cartoons were made for, an audience of, a general theater audience.
Like adults, pretty much. Like, when you hear the animators who worked on the golden years of Merry Melodies and Looney Tunes, they always say that they never tried to target it for children, because it was adults that were paying the money, and they had to sit through it in the first place, and they were the ones who would spend money on merchandise and stuff like that. So there's no reason to, like, lower the intelligence level of these cartoons.
And Chuck Jones, the most famous of the Looney Tunes directors, famously said, "These cartoons were never made for children, nor were they made for adults. They were made for me."
So for me, cartoons were such a big part of my life because the Bugs Bunny and Tweety show would play seemingly endlessly in an age before you could pick exactly what you wanted to see. Like, this was all that was playing on Channel 3 most of the time.
That's right, and it wasn't necessarily a show that you, made appointment viewing for.
No, because it was just always on.
And it wasn't always just the Bugs Bunny and Tweety show either. There was the Bugs and Daffy show, there was the Roadrunner show, there were just tons of...
the Roadrunner show is the poor man's Looney Tunes cartoon.
Yeah, they usually had the more bottom-of-the-barrel Looney Tunes stuff, but there were just, it was just time filler stuff that was on all the time, and I think there are some Looney Tunes cartoons we've probably seen 20 times.
Probably 100 times.
Yeah.
For some reason, they wanted to show, What's Opera Doc over and over and over again, which is really funny because when you look at it, it's the one that probably has the least jokes in it, especially for a kid, because that short, let's just talk about it before we get into the history of Looney Tunes, because I think that when I think of, Bugs Bunny cartoons, that's the one that pops into my mind first, because it is so iconic.
Be very quiet. I'm hunting rabbits.
Kill the rabbit, kill the rabbit. I'm very excited that you can do all your Looney Tune voices on this episode.
And, it's almost a cliche to say that lots of people learned opera from the Looney Tunes cartoons.
Any classical music that I know or opera is from the Looney Tunes.
Welcome to my shop. Let me cut your mop. Let me clean your crop. Daintily.
What's Opera Doc is almost a compression of Wagner's Ring opera, or at least chunks of them, in 6 minutes.
Right.
Because that's what all these cartoons were. They were 6 to 7 minutes. And when you say that, it seems insane. Wait, they packed that much stuff into that?
So dense.
Time? And it wasn't just Chuck Jones either. What's Up Opera Doc was Chuck Jones. There were so many other animators as well.
And I saw an interview with Chuck Jones where he said that theater owners and exhibitors demanded at least 6 minutes. But Leon Schlesinger, the man who owned the Looney Tunes brand for the early days of its existence, said, "Okay, 6 minutes. That's all I'm paying for then."
Yeah, so they had just 6 minutes.
They had 6 minutes and no other leeway.
So when you go back into the history of Warner Brothers Animation, which Merry Melodies and Looney Tunes fell under, what you discover is not people showing up and going, "I have this idea for a character named Bugs Bunny. Let's just make a bunch of cartoons." What you get is a bunch of animators, very good ones, kind of toiling away for almost a decade until they hit that like magic blend that we consider like the classic cartoons.
Yeah, the Looney Tunes brand started in 1930. It was started by a duo called Rudolph Ising and Hugh Harmon, who had previously worked for Disney, and they created a character, kind of a pilot cartoon called Bosco the Talk Ink Kid, which impressed Leon Schlesinger, who was a money man at Warner Brothers.
And if you look at those early cartoons with Bosco, he looks like a racist caricature of a little black boy. And when any of the animators would be interviewed, they'd be like, oh, we just pictured him as an ink blot. Like, that's the way we imagine the character. But as time went by, he became a very, like, clear racist caricature.
Well, there's enough plausible deniability in how he's designed,
Yes.
right? Because he's also a Mickey Mouse ripoff.
Mm-hmm.
He's like the way Mickey Mouse looks without the ears, but Mickey Mouse is black as well. I actually watched the first Bosco cartoon this week.
Wait, was it the test reel where it's like live action and like Bosco comes out of an inkwell and
Yeah.
like, what you doing?
And he just talks like a black
Yes,
kid.
exactly.
I think his voice becomes higher as the cartoons go on.
Mm-hmm.
But Bosco was the first Looney Tunes superstar, and he appeared in a series of shorts that were okay.
We should clarify that like at this point in animation, everything was dominated by Disney. So when like animated shorts started to get made and you had people like Max Fleischer doing stuff, it was the idea that like everything should be moving. If you look at like Betty Boop cartoons, like every object has eyes and is like bouncing around, oftentimes to music. And what Disney brought in was his animation studio was, let's do this realistically. Like specifically with our feature films, we want them to be on this like real, no like out there stuff to add a lot of verisimilitude to it.
And there's a beautiful lushness to the Disney cartoons.
So people like the Warner Brothers department at that point was trying to imitate that and was also trying to make cute cartoons. And like, there's no imagination in these early Bosco shorts. They even made like cartoons with a character named Foxy, who was just a Mickey Mouse ripoff. He even had the ears and everything.
So Rudolph Ising and Hugh Harmon left in 1933 to start the MGM cartoon division. They took Bosco with them for a while.
We'll see you on the top of our money pile.
Yeah, and of course, MGM, rode Bosco to riches. Everyone today still has their Bosco backpacks.
Bosco did reappear in
An episode of Tiny Toons.
That's right.
Yeah.
And he had a completely different design than he did in the early animated cartoons.
After Ising and Harmon left Warner Brothers, their only cartoon star was a character called Buddy, who was just a white Bosco and had even less personality. But from the period of 33 to 36, they started hiring the most important animators, the most important directors that they would use, including Fred Tex Avery.
Yep, Friz Freleng.
Bob Clampett, and a young Chuck Jones.
Who at that time, like, his obsession was making cute cartoons. He wasn't even going for laughs. All his characters were very well-rounded, and he was just trying to imitate that Disney style.
But many of the other directors were less interested in cuteness. People like Clampett and Avery in particular were pushing more towards this outrageous style. And it didn't happen overnight.
And it was also rooted in this parodying of the Hollywood system. Because I think that the evolution of like the Disney style, because I think that one of the big important parts that a lot of people forget when they think of stuff like Bugs Bunny is how in the now it was and how it was reflecting like pop culture as it was happening.
Yeah, one of the things that Looney Tunes was originally, there was Looney Tunes and there was Merry Melodies. Looney Tunes was thought of by Warner Brothers as a way to market some of the songs that they owned.
Hence the title.
So there would be I Love to Sing, da 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 da, shit like that. Gradually, I think the Looney Tunes and the Merry Melodies eventually became interchangeable.
And they were also split up because one of them was in color, Looney Tunes, and Merry Melodies was in black and white.
Yeah, that's right. It's possibly the other way around.
Yeah, I don't know at this point.
Yeah.
Because the only way me and Will know the difference is just the title when it comes up in the like Bugs Bunny and Tweety Show syndication version. And a lot of those cartoons were originally in black and white and were colored, and we just didn't know.
Such as Porky and Wacky Land.
That's right, which was a favorite of mine as a kid. That was a weird one where not only was it brought into color, it was reanimated by someone else, Friz Freleng in this case.
They just traced over it.
Yeah,
basically.
if you look at them side by side, it's like everything is the same, except it's not as imaginative as the Bob Clampett version. Because like Bob Clampett, like, I always think of Tex Avery as the guy that, like, brought kind of craziness back into cartoons. Because, like, Tex Avery, like, it's the, you know, the dog with, like, the mouse that falls out and the eyes bug out.
Yeah, the wolf.
The wolf, yeah. Ooh!
And there's also Droopy Dog that he created. Well, one of the important directors in sort of defining the Warner Brothers style in the 30s was Frank Tashlin, who later became, a very good maker of live action films. And because of that, maybe he was interested in the filmic possibilities of cartoons. His cartoons had very rapid fire editing, innovative camera angles, much more visual imagination than some of his colleagues.
Yeah, because Friz Freleng at the Warner Brothers lot, he was like the granddaddy when it came to like directors. Like the animation that he did was very like joke. There was kind of over the top stuff, but didn't really like bend it too much. And the thing about Frank Tashlin is that while his cartoons aren't really the funniest, mostly because like the cartoons he was making were right on the cusp of like the change at Warner Brothers before he went to go do live action, it's that they were the most cinematic. If you look at something like the Bugs Bunny cartoon that he did, I don't remember what it's called.
The Unruly Hair, was it?
Yeah, the Unruly Hair, which is a Bugs and Elmer Fudd one. Not only is it a constant, straightforward flow, there's no blackout sketches, which means just gag. He also uses like close-ups and he uses reverse shots and just crazy stuff like that like no other animator was doing.
There's a great Frank Tashlin cartoon that I watched this week called Porky Pig's Feet, where Donald Duck is talking to a kind of a pudgy manager of a building, and he like puts his face closer and closer to it and closer, and then his face, like the fat guy's face, starts to engulf Daffy Duck's face.
And like I think that Frank Tashlin, like he always comes up when people start to talk about like Warner Brothers directors, and it's a little bit unfortunate that like he didn't get a chance to like use the formula as well as it was, and that he was still kind of figuring it out. Most of his cartoons came out during World War II when they were doing stuff like Daffy Duck, like buy more war bonds.
But he also introduced a lot of the things that would be pushed further by other directors. Frank Tashlin started to introduce a lot of that fourth wall breaking stuff. He started to introduce moments in the cartoons where characters would be conscious of the fact they were in cartoons or conscious of their status as Warner Brothers characters.
Yeah. And this was kind of grabbed by everybody else and just extended into what it would become. And we should get back to Bob Clampett because, like, you said last week that he's one of your favorites, right? If not the favorite.
I think so. And, you know, Chuck Jones, I think on points wins.
Yes.
He's got more masterpieces than... I'm just going to say any filmmaker ever. Like
I would completely agree with you.
It's stunning when you look at what he made. That said, Bob Clampett's worldview, his style, speaks to me very strongly.
So Bob Clampett, when I think of his animation style, it's the idea that anything can bend and kind of like move in every direction. He's an animator that his characters are in constant motion. The thing about Chuck Jones is often characters moving quickly into comedic poses, and that's where the laugh goes. And Bob Clampett, sometimes a little bit tougher to laugh at them because they're always moving.
Like his Elmer Fudd, for example, is a very fat Elmer Fudd.
Yes, with a big head.
And his body is always just moving in so many ways. Or there's an amazing Bob Clampett cartoon, The Old Gray Hair, where Elmer Fudd and Bugs Bunny travel to the future, to the year 2000.
Yeah, because Elmer Fudd wants to finally kill Bugs Bunny.
And they're so old.
Yes.
And like, it's a cliche thing to say, but you can put any frame on a gallery wall. The contortions these characters' faces make as old characters.
Even though you probably couldn't, because a lot of the frames that they would use, the transparencies for animation, they would wipe off and redraw on it to like make more cartoons. We forgot to mention that all these guys were in a building that's most famously known as Termite Terrace because supposedly it had termites.
And it was just a bungalow where they worked. And you can sort of tell a Chuck Jones cartoon, you can tell a Bob Clampett cartoon, but it was a very collaborative atmosphere too. Yeah,
and you could tell a Friz Freleng cartoon or a Frank Tashlin one. Like, they all have their particular quirks, but at the same time, they're all working in the same world. And like the characters that we know and love, like I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, it took a while to evolve to the point that you know them. Like, I remember as a kid, I would see like a Bugs Bunny cartoon and be like, wait, Bugs Bunny looks weird.
Yeah.
Like, he looks bigger, like he's more wobbly than he would become.
Yeah, so, and And it's hard to attribute authorship of Bugs Bunny to any one filmmaker. A version of Bugs Bunny appeared in a 1938 cartoon called Porky's Hare Hunt.
That's right.
And then and then another sort of rabbit-like character appeared in Presto Chango. And, you know, a couple of different versions until Tex Avery's A Wild Hare, which is the first official one.
The Elmer Fudd chasing Bugs Bunny cartoon, the What's Up Doc eating the carrot stuff.
But even then, the character would evolve after that. And I think other characters, too, like Daffy Duck begins as a very kooky...
Yeah, like crazy, like Porky's trying to hunt him, and he's like...
And then... Yeah, and then Chuck Jones turned him into the Daffy Duck we know today, this bitter rival to Bugs Bunny.
Who thinks he's amazing, but is really lame. Mm-hmm. And, like, Chuck Jones is the one that, I mean, you hear him talk because he's the one who lasted the longest out of all these guys. He can very clearly describe why these characters work. Like, the idea that once they figured out that Bugs Bunny was a character that would often, in his best shorts, fight against a bully and would be unflappable in a way, and that's what was impressive about him, and is one of the reasons that, like, during World War II, Bugs Bunny was super popular. Everybody loved him because he was this unflappable kind of hero character.
Yeah, and he became only that even more so as Chuck Jones became increasingly important. You know, if Tex Avery is very interested in gags, gag, each one wilder than the last, no limit to how crazy the gag can get. Chuck Jones is very interested in the characters.
Yeah, and, like, what motivates them. Like, the way that he talks about the Roadrunner and the Coyote, and the fact that, like, this is all based on the idea that it's a kind of arrogance of what he's trying to do. Because, like, eating that Roadrunner, it won't taste good. Like, there's almost no meat on that. But it's the futility of trying to do this over and over and over again. And just not learning any lesson.
And I believe Chuck Jones actually had, like, a list of 10 rules of the Roadrunner.
And, like, you can even see that in the kind of permutations that the Coyote would take. Like, there's a Bugs Bunny and Coyote cartoon where the Coyote talks.
Well, Wile E. Coyote, super genius.
Yeah, and he's this arrogant guy, which adds even more to, like, you wanting to see him get injured. While the Roadrunner and Coyote cartoons is more about, like, the sympathy that you're like, oh, I can't believe this is happening to this dumb animal. Or there was the, was it Sam? It was like the sheepdog and Coyote cartoons.
Yeah.
Which has one of the best gags of Looney Tunes ever. The idea that, like, they beat each other up and then they go and clock out at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And there's this one that ends with both of them arm in arm, the sheepdog and the coyote, and he's like, isn't this a great life? As they walk off into the sunset.
I think that's just such a useful metaphor.
Yeah, it is.
For, like, politics.
Everything.
Yeah.
The idea of, like, oh, good morning, Sam. Good morning, Ralph.
And
like,
it's all kind of a show.
Yeah, that's all that it is.
Yeah. So, you know, Tex Avery is an extremely important director because he crystallized Bugs Bunny, but I think Tex Avery did his best work for MGM after he left. He did Red Hot Riding Hood and the Northwest Town Police and King Size Canary. Great fucking cartoons.
But that nobody talks about because they weren't in syndication. Like,
and they don't have recognizable characters in them, really, except for Droopy.
That's a problem with Frank Tashlin as well, is that he would often work with, like, one-off characters or one-off stories.
I mean, if I can just put one idea out into the ether for this episode, like, seek out the Tex Avery MGM cartoons. He really is one of the best filmmakers who ever lived, I want to say. But maybe we should talk a little bit more about, but if you want to get a sense of, like, you know, who Bob Clampett and Chuck Jones were as animators, since I'm just going to say now they're probably the two most important Looney Tunes animators.
And Friz Freleng, who won the most Oscars out of any of them.
That's right. I mean, Friz Freleng is a little harder to get an auteurist read on.
Well, he was just a company man. That's what he was. Like, he did what he did very well, and he had no compunctions about kind of retracing cartoons or just doing gag. Like, some of the funniest Bugs Bunny cartoons that I remember are Friz Freleng ones, like the one where Bugs Bunny has to jump off the diving board and Yosemite Sam wants to make him do it. That's a Friz Freleng cartoon.
And it's a masterpiece.
So good.
High diving hair. Yeah, Friz Freleng did a ton of great ones. Nighty Night Bugs.
Which also won an Academy Award. The only one that starred Bugs Bunny that won an Academy Award, which is crazy.
Because it's not really that great.
No, it's fine.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at the ones that actually won awards, it's like Sylvester and Tweety ones, like, not my favorites. They're amusing, but it's like, bring back Bugs Bunny or Daffy Duck.
So Bob Clampett made Porky and Wacky Land,
yes,
The Great Piggy Bank Robbery, Corny Concerto, The Old Gray Hair, The Big Snooze, Book Review, Coal Black and the Seven Dwarfs.
Yeah, which me and Will watched today. It's still unreleased on any DVD, and if you watch it, you'll go, oh yes, I understand. It is incredibly racist.
It's quite racist.
And anybody that tries to defend it like, well, but it has a ton of great gags. well, all of those gags are based in racism, so very problematic.
But Chuck Jones, I said he's made more masterpieces than maybe any other filmmaker. Get a load of this. Duck Amuck, What's Opera Doc, The Rabbit of Seville, Duck Dodgers in the 24th and a half century.
Can we talk about Duck Amuck for a second? Because I think that's my favorite Looney Tunes cartoon ever.
Yeah.
And I think that when you look at it, it's easy to go like, oh, well, it's because it's meta and it can do all this crazy stuff. But what's interesting about it is that they did it with Bugs Bunny afterwards.
Yeah, and it doesn't work as well because it's very dependent on like Daffy Duck as this like the frustrated, underappreciated
star in his eyes. Like, he tries his best, like that thing where he's like dashing through the snow. Oh.
Yeah, and the background
changes, and he's like, all right, listen, guys.
One of the character details I love in Duck Amuck is this idea that he's this showbiz professional.
Yes.
It's like, yeah, you know what? I'm a star. Doesn't matter the incompetence I'm working with. Put me in any situation, I'll entertain. There's that one part when essentially Daffy decides to stop working with the animator. He says, folks, I've decided to entertain you in my inimitable fashion.
And he starts doing a soft shoe.
Yeah, he just starts dancing.
I think probably my favorite moment of it, it's not even the funniest, but it's just the execution of it. It's the one where he's trying to hold up the like top of the frame that keeps falling on him. Yeah. And it's not just falling like hard, and it's falling like droopy, like it was liquid.
Yeah.
And he tries to like prop it up with a stick, and then it just kind of falls on him, and he rips it up. He's like, and then he like catches his breath. Like that's real anger that you're seeing from this character, but it's funny in the way that it's executed because of who he is.
The timing of the cartoons is unbelievable. I mean, I think I read a Chuck Jones quote where he said the difference between humor and non-humor can be one frame.
Yes.
That's how high the stakes are.
And for people that don't know how cartoons are made, like it's not a storyboard is done and then you give it to the animators and go for it. The animator actually has to time out every major pose down to the frame. And so nothing is wasted, no extra drawings are made. So like the Roadrunner cartoons, Chuck Jones would know like, all right, he needs to hold there for this many frames, and then he has to fall for this many frames for it to be funny.
So in Operation Rabbit, which is that Wile E. Coyote Bugs Bunny cartoon, there's a part where Wile E. Coyote is in a little shack and he's putting poison in carrots. And then unbeknownst to him, Bugs Bunny takes a tractor and moves his shack onto a train track, and there's a window open behind him. And, Wile E. Coyote's like looking down at his little experiment. He's like, oh, I'm such a genius. And the train is coming behind him. Then he turns around, he looks out. There's a pause as the train is approaching them, and then he like closes the curtain.
Yes.
The closing of the curtain, like, it's so impeccably timed.
Well, if you look at something like the Hunting trilogy, which it came to define Daffy Ducks and Elmer Fudd, the one where it's the rabbit season, duck season.
Pronoun trouble.
Yeah, those are the simplest version of like cartoons that you can get, because it's just two characters that are just essentially yelling at each other, but just the animation is so funny and the timing of it and the way that like Daffy Duck in those three cartoons, the punchline is always he gets blasted by a shotgun and his beak goes in some weird way that he then has to turn back to normal. And so funny. And
Jones knows how to like hold it for just long enough for Daffy Duck to just like, sit there for a few seconds pondering his predicament.
How did I get here?
Yeah. I mean, another great Chuck Jones cartoon, One Froggy Evening.
Yes.
I think a case could be made the best cartoon of all time.
Probably not only one of the most memorable and the most thematically rich, but also like hilarious. And one that became not just the mascot for the CW network, but also something that you can use every day. Like, it's one of those like, what was it, Michigan J. Frog situations?
Yeah. A wonderful like little morality tale. And it's hilarious. I mean, one of the things that makes it work is as this man who's trying to, get rich off the singing frog, as his life continues to unravel, and it gets worse for him, the frog just keeps singing.
Yes.
And the juxtaposition between like the misery of his situation and the just mindless, energy of the frog. Or like,
hello, my baby. Hello, my darling.
Like, there's also so much richness to like the mise en scène of it.
Yes.
This guy is just a lowly construction worker, and then you see him at his apartment, and it's this shitty apartment, and he's got some money like stashed in a box under his bed.
Well, like something that Looney Tunes brought to the animated field that people don't talk about too much is also like the backgrounds by Maurice Noble that were like super stylized stylized, and that like before that, if you look at like the pre-World War II ones, the backgrounds are very well animated and very detailed, and that when you start to remove things and you make them like these kind of just abstract ideas, most clearly defined like the Roadrunner cartoons or What's Opera Doc, the humor just comes out more from that because that level of unreality kind of focuses just the gag.
You know, another thing that Chuck Jones brought to the Bugs Bunny character, or maybe underlined or developed in the Bugs Bunny character, was his kind of moral code. So I think it was a Chuck Jones cartoon that introduced the line, "Of course, you know, this means war."
Stolen from our favorites, the Marx Brothers.
Well, and I think, in fact, Groucho Marx is an influence on Bugs Bunny.
Because the carrot being like a cigar that Groucho would carry.
But, you know, one of my favorite Chuck Jones cartoons, The Long-Haired Hare, which is the one where he's fighting that opera singer.
Oh, that one's so good.
Because there's the scene at the beginning where the opera singer is at his home. He's trying to rehearse, but he keeps, like, Bugs Bunny's outside playing his banjo. And then the opera singer...
Yep.
The opera singer's a jerk to him, and then he keeps beating up Bugs Bunny. And then finally, after 3 incidents, Bugs goes, "Of course, you know, this means war." And then he... unleashes this incredibly sadistic and complicated plot of revenge.
I think that the best Bugs Bunny cartoons are the ones where he gets beat up a little bit at the beginning and then comes back and does these crazy impossible things, like Bully for Bugs, where he fights the bull in the bullfighting ring. That's one of my favorites of all time. I remember when I got the Golden Collection on DVD, these amazing box sets that Warner Brothers put out, and like the climax of that one came up where the bull rushes back into the bull ring, and he like lands on grease, which he slides on, and then flies into the air where paper is stuck to him, which lights a match, which as he's flying through the air, he sees the match light dynamite and goes across and ahead of him. That's so funny.
That is another one of my favorite gags where Bugs comes up to the bull and he goes, "Oh, excuse me," and he puts this bungee cord on his horns, and then he goes off into the distance, and you see in the distance this from the bull's eye view, tiny Bugs Bunny as he like puts a big boulder in the bungee cord, and then you see the boulder come towards the camera.
Because you get these characters who are bad, and you want to see them get their comeuppance, and at the same time, Chuck Jones would like hold there in that coyote way for a second before the pain hits them. And the laughter comes from the coyote holding up like a little sign that says like, I don't know, this is gonna hurt or something like that.
like a big boulder's about to fall on the coyote, and then he like brings out a little umbrella.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's the things we try to do in life to protect us, even though that the situation that we're in is our fault anyway.
But like Bugs Bunny, it's a very complicated balance that the character has to have, because he can't seek out conflict.
No, he can't. He can't go and kind of maliciously torture some people, even though that he did in the early ones, where he's just kind of a troublemaker in the way that Daffy Duck originally was.
There's a Bob Clampett one called, I think, The Wacky Wabbit, where he fucks with Elmer, and then he looks at the camera and says, "I do stuff like this to him throughout the picture." But later on, he has to be somebody who like doesn't seek it out, has to be provoked. But then once he's provoked, he's allowed to be completely sadistic, and he's allowed to enjoy the suffering of his opponent.
But he often does it stone-faced as well. Like he'll reveal the gag, like pull the thing away, and then the bull hit like an anvil or something like that.
Yeah.
Or like that amazing Yosemite Sam on the diving board one again. Like that one is all Yosemite Sam's doing. Like Bugs Bunny just wants it to end, and Yosemite is like, "No, get back up there. I want to see you dive."
Good stuff. Maybe we should just mention a few other good collaborators. Musical director Carl Stalling.
Yeah, that when he left, people said that like the cartoons took a noticeable dip because not only is the animation, but it's also the music and the way that it's incorporated in these like little 6-minute bits that work so well. Because there's music throughout them, and not only do they add to the picture, they don't distract from it. Like you're never watching and go, that music's not well placed. It's just always perfect.
There are also writers, Warren Foster and Michael Maltese in particular, and the voice artists, obviously Mel Blanc, the first name I ever knew associated with these cartoons.
Yeah, because when you hear that one guy does all the voices, not true,
that you
go, that's crazy. Like Mel Blanc could do a lot of voices, but if you see something like we talk about on our Patreon episode, Strange Brew, like you can recognize his voice when he does it as well.
That's right. He's not exactly the man of 1,000 voices, because there's also Arthur Q. Bryant, the voice of Elmer Fudd.
The only voice that he did.
And June Foray, who was, Witch Hazel and the granny character for those Sylvester and Tweety cartoons.
And they often weren't credited in the cartoons that they did.
It's too bad.
Yeah, but, anybody who's interested in them, all the credits are up on the internet now. Like anything that lasts, decades, there was an expiration date to the theatrical release Looney Tunes cartoons.
And also, I think, those old timers, there's a period when they were at their peak, and then they were not at their peak anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, we watched this thing that Tex Avery did in the 60s. So Tex Avery had that great run at MGM, and then apparently there came a point where he was just like, I don't find this funny anymore. It's like he just sort of lost it. And then he was contracted to do some Bugs Bunny cartoons for Kool-Aid in the 60s.
Yes.
Not very good.
No, they're fine. There's not many animation frames in them.
Yeah.
They look like Hanna-Barbera cartoons. A lot of the writers went to go work for Hanna-Barbera after they left Warner Brothers.
I guess I'm not surprised by that. They have a bit of a,
Yeah, well, because what happens when something becomes popular is that the money men try to figure out how can we do this more cheaply, and will they still enjoy it? And when you do something like the Flintstones, which is very kind of poorly animated, and the kids still eat it up, it's like, why the hell would we spend all this money doing theatrically released shorts?
Yeah, and the last couple of years of Looney Tunes, I'm not that well versed in the end of the Looney Tunes. I know that one of the last characters they tried to introduce was a Bunny and Claude, which were a Bonnie and Clyde parody with squirrels, and it's like we steal acorns or something.
Yeah, I have a vague memory of seeing it on television.
Yeah,
those cute two little chipmunks. Probably.
Those I think are two other characters.
Oh, okay, some more chipmunk characters.
Those kind of like I want let's face it, gay.
Yeah,
I didn't like those.
Really?
I don't know. They were a little lame.
They were one of those characters that I do enjoy this idea of not being aware of what's going on around them, because there was that cartoon where they go into the kind of wood mill, and what you see is them just kind of walking and not paying attention as everything gets chopped up around them. That's funny stuff.
Yeah.
But they were the cartoons that when they would come on syndication, you'd be like, give me Daffy or Bugs.
Yeah.
Because they're the fun ones, right?
Yeah. I also was never crazy about Speedy Gonzales or, Pepe Le Pew.
I mean, yeah, Pepe Le Pew.
Problematic.
Very problematic. So was Speedy Gonzales.
In the 70s and 80s, the old timers like Friz Freleng and Chuck Jones got occasional work doing TV specials, or a lot of those Bugs Bunny cartoons were repackaged into feature-length compilation films.
Yeah, or reanimated. There's a lot of Bugs Bunny meets Speedy Gonzales or stuff like that that are kind of pasted together to make a new cartoon.
Oh, yeah.
Just atrocious. Just people that think that the kids are showing it to don't give a fuck and don't care, and it's like, come on, guys.
But I think what this was all really building up towards was Lunatics Unleashed.
Yeah, that's right. Which was I'm gonna say late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah, I think it was around the same time as Looney Tunes Back in Action.
Yeah, and it's this reimagining of the Looney Tunes characters as space warriors, and it's the idea of you have the brand and you don't want to do the thing that it's the most famous for, and you think that people are going to just enjoy seeing these characters that are not doing what people like them to do.
I read an interview with Joe Dante talking about making his film Looney Tunes Back in Action, and he said it was a very frustrating experience because he was making this movie for executives who wouldn't cross the street to see it.
Yeah, and that's a problem because, like I said at the beginning of the episode, a lot of people think that cartoons are for kids, right? Even the early Looney Tunes stuff, because they watched it as kids. So why should they give them any value in this day and age? But the reality of it is they're just as funny, if not funnier, than when I was a kid.
I think there are certain things that I'll start watching them, maybe every 6 months or a year, I'll start watching Looney Tunes cartoons, and then I'll think, why do I not only watch this? It's got everything.
Yeah.
I feel that way about The Simpsons too.
So I actually asked last week if kids watch Looney Tunes cartoons anymore, because Saturday morning cartoons don't really exist in an age where you can watch whatever you want. So people actually got back to me, specifically April Atmansky, who posted on her wall, and she knows a lot of people who have children, and some responses there's a new Bugs Bunny on Netflix. I think it's weirdly topical. Everyone has cell phones. Somebody else wrote, I think we watched it once and they didn't have much interest. Nathan used to watch Baby Looney Tunes, though. So I'm guessing that's Tiny Toons?
Man, I don't know.
Other people went, yes, they loved it. We streamed it with the Cody box. Somebody else wrote, rarely. They haven't shown much interest in it. I asked the girls if they liked it, and one of my kids said yes, and my other kid said, what's that?
Huh.
Because the only way kids would watch it now is if parents are making them watch it.
I feel like they're the sorts of cartoons the kids could still like if they were on.
I mean, they're colorful, they're simple,
they're funny, they're violent,
are so iconic that like you can latch on to it. Hopefully, people will still keep showing it to their kids because it's good.
I also don't see Warner Brothers really kind of exploiting the characters the way they could be. Like, I see Mickey Mouse t-shirts all the time, but I don't see Bugs Bunny merch a lot.
I feel like it's probably because Warner Brothers kind of drove it into the ground. Because like Space Jam was like we're bringing it back and now they're cool again. And so was Looney Tunes Back in Action. I think Looney Tunes Back in Action was kind of like nails in the coffin, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And it's difficult to kind of bring them on the level of someone like Mickey Mouse, even though that they should be, because Mickey Mouse has no personality, but Bugs Bunny does.
You know, it's funny. As a kid, I didn't see the Mickey Mouse cartoons very much.
Me neither.
Yeah.
Never. He was just an icon and nothing more.
Yeah.
But it was something that you associated with Disney. And they made some new Mickey Mouse cartoons recently that are 100% Warner Brothers cartoons. Like, you can see them online, and they're done in the Flash style, which is like, it's so bad.
Yeah, I feel like when I eventually saw the Mickey Mouse cartoons, I sort of admired them more than I liked them.
Well, they're not very funny.
Yeah.
Because that's not really what interested Walt Disney.
And they're quite slow, but the Warner Brothers cartoons are still like a straight punch in the gut of laughter.
Anybody out there, go watch the Looney Tunes cartoons again, because they're hilarious. And parents, show them to your kids. They'll appreciate it. All right, so as per usual, you can send us letters at importantcinemaclubpodcast@gmail.com. This week on our Patreon, we're talking about Rick Moranis. Will digs up dirt on the SCTV reunion that he went and saw last week. And we talk about Little Shop of Horrors and Strange Brew, which I had never seen before. So listen to my reactions of that on the Patreon, patreon.com/The Important Cinema Club Podcast.
Do we have any letters?
Yes, we do. We have one, and it's from Sean Glynis. And he goes, "Hey guys, after hearing about a listener who chose Woody Allen's Anything Else as his hill to die on a past episode, it reminded me that Anything Else was the first Woody Allen film I saw in cinemas once I had developed into a full-fledged Woody Allen fan. Seeing his opening credits in the Windsor Light font, I had come to associate as comforting. It was a special moment for me, even if I could recognize the movie was, as you guys say, a second-rate Annie Hall retread. My question is, have you guys had similar experiences of any director's work, whether you have come to love their films and then finally got to see one on the big screen? I'm trying to think, like, is there a director that I loved and when I finally got to see, like, in front of me with a crowd, that it made that big a difference?
Oh, I remember when I was, one of the kind of, when I was an early teenager, one of the kind of art house guys that I liked, who I really got into, was
Life is Beautiful.
Yeah, Life is Beautiful. No, it was Werner Herzog, and so I remember seeing Invincible in a theater, which is not one of his classics, but I was very excited. And then later, Grizzly Man. It was very exciting, like, to be in the audience for that coming out. Actually, speaking of Woody Allen, I remember going to see Curse of the Jade Scorpion in a theater and having a lot of anticipation, being like, I can't believe I'm seeing I spent all summer watching his movies, and now I'm going to see the new one.
Curse of the Jade Scorpion.
Curse of the Jade Scorpion.
Oh, yeah, that was okay, he said as you left.
Yeah, I mean, I feel that way sometimes, whenever a new Jean-Luc Godard movie comes out, where I kind of feel like, wow,
this is gonna be the last one.
Well, here I am. I wasn't in the audience for Breathless when that came out, but here I am at the latest dispatch from the Grinch from Switzerland.
I remember when I saw Army of Darkness on 35mm in a theater with a crowd, and that was like, whoa, seeing it on the big screen. And at the time, the cinematographer was in the audience.
Oh yeah, I was at that too.
Yeah, and it was a print that was like really beat up and like it didn't look too good. And Victoria Dobbs, the manager of the theater, was sitting beside me. She got up 20 minutes in and went, the camera moves are too crazy. They're making me feel sick. And I was like, whoa, that's crazy.
Do you remember the cinematographer, Bill Pope, in the Q&A, he said something like, this is really how we kind of dreamed of seeing it when we were making it, barely audible sound, kind of muddy picture, like you were watching it at a bad drive-in.
Bill Pope was pretty dismissive of the movie as well, where he's like, whoa, you guys really enjoyed that, eh?
Yeah.
Those are my favorite Q&As.
This is maybe a different sort of experience, but I remember when I was a teenager and I was like coming downtown to go to Kung Fu Fridays, which Colin Geddes used to program at the Royal. And it was these oftentimes very obscure Kung Fu movies on 35 millimeter prints. And it was so kind of amazing to me that A, I was watching them on a print, and B, in a theater with other people.
I remember when I first moved to Toronto and I started going to theaters kind of on my own, because when I lived in Ottawa, while they did have kind of rep theaters, they would mostly play like art house stuff. They wouldn't have that many kind of like retro screenings. But like 10 years ago, when I was looking at the listings, I was like, oh, well, I'll go see 2001 on this day, I guess. Like, if I have time, that's playing at the Bloor Cinema, or The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And there's like a million things happening. And that there was something kind of magical about that idea, which doesn't exist anymore.
Oh, God, that just reminds me about how, 10 years ago, all the rep theaters in this city were playing stuff on film.
Yeah, we say this all the time, though. Like, there should be like a check mark that, like,
I know.
if you count how many times we said it, you get like a free episode or something like that.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm sorry. The thing is, I look back and I think, there were so many more I should have gone to.
Yeah, but you didn't realize. You always assume those things are going to last forever.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, I'm not going to see this movie now, so I'll just see it later. Not realizing, like, it's not going to come back. Like, the Royal Cinema does stuff like that if you're like, I don't want to see it, you're never going to see it again, because why would anybody do that again?
Man, I wonder what some of the things in my life right now I'm taking for granted are.
Right here, man.
This?
Yeah, that's right.
Eventually we'll be, old men with kids and grandkids. And
just listening to these old episodes. Remember when we used to watch movies all week and then get together and talk about it?
Oh, it's too bad we had that terrible falling out.
Yeah, that's right. I shot Will Sloan in the arm, which then had to be amputated. I've made this whole history in my mind already. All right, so thanks very much for sending the letter. So next week, we're doing something a little bit different. We're going to be talking about the work of Kalatazov, who's most famous for making The Cranes Are Flying and I Am Cuba. But I don't know if me and Will would have enough to talk about when it comes to him. While those two films are iconic, Cranes Are Flying was put out by the Criterion Collection. I Am Cuba was remastered and released by like Francis Ford Coppola and Martin Scorsese. I looked for books about him and I couldn't find any of them. I'm sure they exist, but they're not available to me. So I thought that maybe I wanted to approach his big films stylistically. And that when I think of him, what he's most famous for are his long takes. Like, I Am Cuba has jaw-droppingly long camera takes that go on for like what seems like 30 minutes, up, down, across. Paul Thomas Anderson, when he made Boogie Nights, was incredibly inspired by I Am Cuba and the way that like the camera would go down an elevator and then would go into a pool and stuff like that. And then it got me thinking that stylistically the long take is the thing that like cinephiles kind of obsess over the most when they get into movies.
Yeah, young cinephiles particularly,
yes.
Yeah.
Because that's something that like it's quantifiable. The idea of like, whoa, they did this all in one go, even though like people get up on stage and they do 4-hour performances and it's all in one go. But in cinema, it just means something different. So not only will we be talking about I Am Cuba and The Cranes Are Flying, we're also going to be talking about like long takes in cinema, whether it be like Goodfellas or even something like Children of Men, where like that's a long take movie and that's all really people talk about, and what this style means to like the thematic concerns of those movies. Because something like I Am Cuba, what's interesting about it was that it was supposed to be a piece of propaganda. And that when the propaganda minister saw it, they said, we cannot release this because those long takes you use give it a different feel than it would have if you just made a straight movie. So like, what does that mean? And that's what we're going to be digging into in that episode. So until then, my name is Justin DeClue.
I'm Will Sloan.
Thanks for listening. And as per usual, you can follow me at DeClueJ on Twitter.
I'm at Will Sloan ESQ.
And Justin DeClue on Letterboxd, and that's DECLOUX. And make sure to go and rate and review us on iTunes. Said it last week, nobody did.
Ha! That's all, folks. Actually, that's not all, folks.
That's like a record scratch just for you teenagers out there.
Before we recorded this episode, Justin and I watched a couple of cartoons, and one of them was Hollywood Steps Out, which is set at a Hollywood nightclub, and it's simply like a series of caricatures of...
horrifying caricatures.
They look like Dick Tracy villains. Caricatures of then popular Hollywood stars. So like Clark Gable,
the Three Stooges,
the Marx Brothers,
Jimmy Stewart,
Henry
and a
Fonda.
Parade of faces that we did not recognize.
Yeah, quite a few we didn't recognize. It's interesting kind of which stars are the ones who really endure. Humphrey Bogart's in it.
Or like what kind of cultural moments are referenced in it. Something Bing Crosby and a horse? Like,
yeah, okay, so this is something that came up in The Old Grey Hair as well, where Elmer Fudd looks at a newspaper in the year 2000 and it said, Bing Crosby's horse still hasn't come in. And then in this cartoon, Hollywood steps out, like a horse keeps coming on stage while Bing Crosby's talking. Write in and tell us, what was this thing with Bing Crosby
I mean, we
and a
could look
horse?
online, but as you said, I'd rather not, because then it will be a mystery I will have to solve throughout my life.
Yeah, it's like, and I feel that way about a lot of Looney Tunes cartoons, because so many of them are very topical. Like, there's a line that they keep saying in them where somebody will say, I'm only 3.5 years old. Well, that was a radio character who would say that.
But, like, it has gone beyond that, and because the Looney Tunes are more popular than that radio show, that has become, like, the text, right?
Yeah,
not the parody.
Exactly. And actually, a perfect example of that is Foghorn Leghorn was based on a character from the Fred Allen show called Senator Cleghorn. Now, that's totally lost to modern audiences.
Oh, I'm glad you actually brought Foghorn Leghorn up, because we forgot to mention the other director that was, like, under all of the ones we actually mentioned, which was Robert McKimson.
Yes.
Who was also famous for kind of designing all the characters. Like, he kind of streamlined a lot of them into the popular shape that they would take.
Yeah, I think he's generally considered the least genius of the major animators.
Even though he did work on all of them, but like his cartoons would be like Bugs Bunny meets that gorilla. Remember Gruesome Gorilla?
Yeah,
or Gorilla Gruesome,
Yeah.
who only appeared in that. Oh, actually, he did 3 of them, but nobody remembers them.
Robert McKimson did one cartoon that I think is great, and it's A Star is Bored, which is Bugs Bunny telling the story of his life.
Oh, yes, I remember, because he's by the pool at the beginning, where the camera kind of like, and we see now in Hollywood Hills, and it like zooms in on him.
And there's that whole like origin story where he meets Elmer Fudd, and and they're on stage, and he says, "What's up, Doc?" for the first time.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like a parody of like the Jolson story or one of those corny biopics of the time.
Or for kids today, the like, I didn't do it kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, like, Foghorn Leghorn, again, he was one of those characters that I'm like, Foghorn Leghorn cartoon.
Yeah,
like,
I never liked Foghorn Leghorn. No. I'll say.
My dad would imitate him all the time, though, because it's something that's so, like, recognizable and easy to do.
Well, your dad's really imitating Senator Cleghorn.
Which I'm sure he knew that, and that's what he was. No, he didn't at all. But, like, this idea of, like, topicalness is something that I think about every now and then when I watch like a movie now. Like we mentioned it when we did like a date movie and stuff like that. We're like, this will not, like, what are these jokes? Who are these people? But like, does it matter? Because like the Muppet movie is filled with like stars of the screen at the time, like the original 70s Muppet movie. And you look at them and you go, I see Orson Welles and miscellaneous as a kid. I guess it doesn't matter, right?
Well, I mean, I guess there has to be just something else going on aside from the topical reference.
So you don't think Deadpool 2 will last with all its references to what's going on right now?
Haven't seen it. I wouldn't know. It might be wonderful.